The morning Kira Vance was born, every medical scanner in the hospital screamed warnings. Nurses ran through hallways. Doctors shouted orders that made no sense. Her mother, barely conscious from the difficult birth, watched through heavy eyes as machines went crazy around her newborn daughter. "What is wrong with her?" Elena Vance whispered, her voice weak but filled with fear. The head doctor, a gray-skinned Valorian named Thex, stood frozen at the diagnostic screen. In his 300 years of medical practice across 17 star systems, he had never seen readings like these. The baby girl in the warming pod looked perfectly normal. 10 fingers, 10 toes, soft brown skin, a small patch of dark curly hair on her tiny head. She looked exactly like any human infant should look. But her brain activity was impossible. She appears healthy," Thex finally said, though his 4 eyes could not leave the screen. "Her neural patterns are simply unusual." Unusual was the wrong word. The patterns were not unusual, they were wrong. Human brains followed certain electrical pathways. All species did. These pathways had been mapped and studied for thousands of years across the galactic community. Every intelligent species, from the insect-like Krith to the energy beings of the Palax Nebula, showed brain activity within expected ranges. Kira's brain was doing something else entirely. Something that should not be possible according to every law of neuroscience known to the galactic community. Her father, Marcus Vance, pushed through the crowd of medical staff. He was a cargo hauler by trade, a simple man who worked hard to provide for his small family on the colony world of Heston 7. He did not understand the readings on the screens. He did not care about neural patterns or galactic science. He only wanted to hold his daughter. "Give her to me," he said, and his voice carried the quiet authority of a father who would not be denied. The medical staff looked at each other with uncertainty. Finally, a nurse carefully lifted the tiny baby and placed her in Marcus's arms. Kira opened her eyes for the first time since birth and looked up at her father. Those eyes were dark brown, almost black, and even in those first moments of life, they seemed to hold something that made the nurse step back with a small gasp. "Hello, little one," Marcus said softly. "Welcome to the universe." Kira did not cry. She simply watched her father's face with those strange, knowing eyes. Then she closed them and fell into peaceful sleep. The hospital kept Kira for 2 weeks. Every specialist on Heston 7 came to examine her. They ran tests that should have been uncomfortable for an infant, but Kira seemed unbothered by any of it. She watched the doctors with calm curiosity. She fed well. She slept normally. By every physical measure, she was a perfectly healthy human baby. But the readings never changed. Her brain continued to produce patterns that made no scientific sense. Finally, a senior administrator made a decision. The child was healthy. The parents were worried. The hospital had done everything it could. They released Kira Vance to her family with a recommendation for monthly checkups and a file flagged for further observation. That file would eventually make its way across vast distances of space. It would pass through countless bureaucratic systems. It would sit in databases and be reviewed by analysts who did not understand what they were seeing. For 18 years, that file would travel through the machinery of galactic civilization like a signal fire that nobody quite knew how to interpret. But for now, Kira simply went home with her parents to a small apartment in the worker district of Heston City. Elena recovered from the difficult birth slowly. She was a teacher at the local primary school, a woman of patience and warmth who had always wanted children. The strange readings at the hospital frightened her at first, but as weeks passed and Kira showed no signs of illness or difficulty, Elena allowed herself to hope that the doctors had simply been wrong. "She is perfect," Elena would say to Marcus each night as they watched their daughter sleep. "Whatever those machines said, they were wrong. Look at her. She is absolutely perfect." Marcus would nod and say nothing. He had seen the doctors' faces. He had watched how the nurses kept their distance from his daughter. He knew something was different about Kira. He simply did not care. She was his child. He would protect her from whatever came. The first signs of Kira's true nature appeared when she was 7 months old. Elena had placed her in the playpen with a set of educational blocks designed for infants. The blocks were color-coded and numbered, meant to help Bobbies develop visual recognition and basic motor skills. Elena went to the kitchen to prepare lunch, leaving Kira alone with the blocks for no more than 10 minutes. When she returned, the blocks were arranged in a precise pattern on the floor of the playpen. Kira sat in the center, watching her mother with those dark, ancient eyes. Elena stared at the blocks. Her training as a teacher allowed her to recognize what she was seeing immediately. The blocks were arranged to form a mathematical equation. A simple one, certainly. Addition. But it was correct. And it had been done by a 7-month-old baby who should not even understand that blocks could be stacked, let alone that numbers had meaning. "Marcus," Elena called, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come here, please." Marcus came from the bedroom where he had been sleeping after a night shift. He looked at the blocks. He looked at his daughter. Then he carefully climbed into the playpen, sat down next to Kira, and began to rearrange the blocks into a new equation. Kira watched him work. When he was done, she looked at the blocks for a long moment. Then she reached out with her tiny hands and changed 2 of them to correct his deliberate error. "Well," Marcus said slowly, "I guess she takes after your side of the family." Elena did not laugh. She picked up her daughter and held her tightly, feeling Kira's small heart beating against her chest. Whatever this was, whatever was happening, Kira was still her baby. Still the child she had wanted for so long. Still the center of her world. They decided together that night that they would tell no one. The colony of Heston 7 was not a kind place for those who were different. The human settlers had carved out their existence on this harsh world through conformity and hard work. Those who stood out, who drew attention, who did not fit the expected patterns of colonial life, often found themselves pushed to the margins. Elena and Marcus had both seen families destroyed by rumor and suspicion. They would protect their daughter. They would keep her secret. They would give her as normal a life as they could manage. For a while, this plan worked. Kira learned to hide what she could do. Even before she could speak in full sentences, she seemed to understand that her abilities made people uncomfortable. She stopped solving problems in front of strangers. She learned to answer questions with hesitation, to pretend that tasks were difficult when they were actually effortless. "Why do I have to pretend?" she asked her mother one evening. She was 3 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a children's book that she had already memorized on her first reading. Elena sat down across from her daughter and took her small hands. "Because the world is not always kind to people who are different, sweetheart. Some people are afraid of what they do not understand." "But I understand everything," Kira said, and there was no pride in her voice, only confusion. "Why do they not understand too?" Elena did not have an answer for that. As Kira grew, so did the challenge of keeping her secret. By the age of 5, she had read every book in the small apartment. By 6, she was accessing the colony's limited network database and absorbing information at a rate that should have triggered security alerts. By 7, she had begun to notice patterns in the data that no one else seemed to see. "Mother," she said one morning before school, "there is going to be a problem with the water recycling system in the Eastern District. The filtration algorithms have a cascade failure built into their update protocols. It will happen in 17 days. Elena looked at her daughter with tired eyes. "Kira, we have talked about this. You cannot tell people these things." "But people will get sick. The contamination will affect hundreds of families before they identify the source." "How do you even know this? You are 7 years old." Kira tilted her head slightly, a habit she had developed when trying to explain her thinking to people who could not follow. "I read the maintenance reports. I understood the programming structure. I ran the models in my head. It is not complicated." "It is complicated," Elena said firmly. "It is very complicated for everyone except you. And if you tell people about this, they will ask questions. They will want to know how you knew. They will look at you differently. They might take you away from us." Kira was silent for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. "I understand. I will say nothing." 17 days later, the water recycling system in the Eastern District failed exactly as Kira had predicted. 342 families were affected by contaminated water before the problem was identified and corrected. 12 children were hospitalized. 1 elderly woman died from complications. Kira did not cry when she heard the news. She simply sat in her room and stared at the wall, her brilliant mind turning over the same question again and again. What was the point of understanding everything if she could not use that understanding to help anyone? It was a question that would haunt her for years to come. The years passed slowly on Heston 7. Kira attended school and performed exactly as expected for a bright but unremarkable student. She had friends, or something close to friends. Children her own age who enjoyed her company without understanding that she was different from them in any fundamental way. She learned to laugh at jokes she had understood before they were told. She learned to ask for help with problems she had already solved. She learned the complex social dance of appearing normal while being anything but. At home, with her parents, she could let her guard down slightly. Marcus would bring her engineering manuals from the cargo ships he worked on, delighting in her ability to understand systems that trained technicians struggled with. Elena would discuss literature and philosophy with her daughter, treating her not as a child, but as an intellectual equal. "You will do great things someday," Marcus told her on her 10th birthday. "When the time is right, when the universe is ready for you." "What if the universe is never ready?" Kira asked. "Then you will make it ready," her father said. "That is what people like you do." Kira did not know what people like her meant. As far as she knew, there were no other people like her anywhere in the galaxy. She was alone in a way that most beings could never understand. But she held onto her father's words. Someday, she told herself, someday the universe would be ready. That day came much sooner than anyone expected, and it came in a way that no one could have predicted. It was the spring of Kira's 18th year when the survey ship landed at Heston City's small spaceport. Survey ships were not unusual visitors to the colony world. They came every few years, conducting routine assessments of the planet's population, resources, and development. Most colonists ignored them completely. But this survey ship was different. It carried observers from the Galactic Academy of Sciences, the most prestigious institution of learning in known space. The Academy trained the brightest minds from every species in the galactic community. Its graduates went on to become leaders in every field of endeavor. Governments fought for the privilege of having their citizens admitted. And for reasons known only to the highest levels of galactic bureaucracy, the Academy had decided to conduct aptitude testing on the human colonies. "They are looking for exceptional candidates," Elena explained to Kira over dinner. "Human settlements have never been given this opportunity before. The testing will be available to anyone between 15 and 20 years of age." "I will not take the test," Kira said immediately. Both her parents looked at her with surprise. "Why not?" Marcus asked. "This could be your chance, the chance we have been waiting for." Kira shook her head. "The test is designed to identify exceptional individuals. If I take it, I will not be able to hide what I am. They will see. Everyone will see." "Maybe that is not a bad thing anymore," Elena said gently. "You are an adult now, you cannot hide forever." "I am not hiding, I am protecting us, protecting you." Marcus reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "We do not need protection, Kira. We need you to become who you were meant to be. We have watched you shrink yourself for 18 years, making yourself smaller so others would not be frightened, hiding your light so you would not stand out. It is time to stop." "You do not understand what will happen," Kira said. "I have studied the Academy. I have read everything available about their assessment protocols, their enrollment procedures, their academic structure. If I take their test and score according to my actual abilities, it will create disruption. Questions will be asked. Attention will be drawn. The consequences could extend far beyond our small family." "Let them extend," Elena said firmly. "We did not raise you to be afraid. We raised you to be kind and thoughtful and good. Whatever happens, we will face it together." Kira looked at her parents for a long moment. These two ordinary people who had loved her without reservation from the moment of her birth, who had protected her and guided her and believed in her even when they could not understand her. They were asking her to step into the light. She could not refuse them. "Very well," she said quietly. "I will take the test." The testing center was set up in the colony's community hall. Hundreds of young humans had gathered to take the Academy's aptitude assessment, their faces bright with hope and nervous excitement. Most of them had spent weeks preparing, studying old examination materials, practicing problem-solving techniques. Kira had not prepared at all. She already knew everything the test could possibly ask. The format was standard for galactic assessments. A series of increasingly difficult problems designed to measure analytical reasoning, pattern recognition, creative problem-solving, and knowledge integration across multiple disciplines. The test adapted to each individual's performance, becoming harder as they answered correctly and easier as they made mistakes. Most candidates finished in approximately 4 hours. The highest scores in the colony's history had been achieved in just under 3 hours. Kira completed the test in 47 minutes. When she submitted her final answer, the testing system flagged her results for immediate review. A message appeared on her screen asking her to remain seated. Around her, other candidates continued working, unaware that anything unusual had occurred. 20 minutes later, a door at the back of the hall opened and 3 figures emerged. They were not human. The one in front was a Valorian, tall and gray-skinned with 4 eyes that moved independently as they scanned the room. Behind came a being of pure light energy, a Palax whose form shifted and flickered with each movement. The third was something Kira had never seen before, a creature like flowing metal that had no fixed shape. They walked directly to her testing station. "Kira Vance," the Valorian said. Her voice was carefully neutral. "Please come with us." Every eye in the hall turned toward them. Kira felt the weight of hundreds of stairs as she stood and followed the 3 Academy officials through the door and into a private chamber beyond. The room was simple. A table, 4 chairs, a display screen on one wall. Kira sat down and waited. "My name is Director Thessaly," the Valorian said, settling into the chair across from her. "I oversee admissions for the Academy's Human Integration Program. These are my colleagues, Illuminant Prax and Flux Entity 7th. Kira nodded politely to each of them. "I assume my test results were unusual." "Unusual is not the word I would choose," Director Thessaly said. "In 14,000 years of Academy history, across more than 800 participating species, no candidate has ever achieved a perfect score on the aptitude assessment. The test is specifically designed to be impossible to perfect. It adapts to identify the upper limits of each individual's capabilities." "You completed every problem correctly," the Palax being said. Its voice was like wind chimes in a storm. "Including theoretical challenges that have no known solutions. You did not merely answer the test. You advanced multiple fields of science in the process." Kira said nothing. This was exactly what she had feared. "How is this possible?" Director Thessaly asked. "Your file indicates no formal education beyond colonial standard, no access to advanced technology or resources, no contact with the broader galactic community. Yet your demonstrated capabilities exceed those of our most accomplished scholars." "I think differently than others," Kira said carefully. "I always have." "That is not an explanation." "No, but it is the truth." The metal being, Flux Entity 7th, spoke for the first time. Its voice was the sound of gears turning, of engines humming, of systems processing. "We have accessed your medical records, the ones from your birth, the neural scans that were flagged but never investigated." Kira went very still. 18 years ago, the automated monitoring systems of the Galactic Medical Network flagged an anomaly on this world. A human infant with brain activity patterns that matched no known species or condition. The flag was reviewed, classified as a sensor error, and archived. It was never deleted, however. It simply waited in the system until someone thought to look for it. "We are looking now," Director Thessaly said. "We have analyzed those original scans and compared them to the results of your aptitude testing. The patterns match. Whatever was different about you at birth is still different now, perhaps more different than ever." "What do you want from me?" Kira asked. The 3 officials looked at each other. Some communication passed between them that Kira could not interpret. "We want to offer you admission to the Galactic Academy of Sciences," Director Thessaly said finally. "Full scholarship, unlimited access to our resources, the opportunity to study with the greatest minds in known space. But we also want to study you, to understand what you are and how you came to be. Your existence represents a scientific mystery of the highest order. The implications could be vast." Kira thought about her parents, about the life she had lived on Heston 7, about all the years of hiding and pretending and making herself smaller. She thought about the water recycling system and the families who had suffered because she had been afraid to speak. "If I accept," she said, "what happens to my family?" "They will be protected," Director Thessaly assured her. "Relocated to Academy-controlled space if necessary, given whatever resources they require. Your cooperation is valuable enough that we are prepared to be generous." "And if I refuse?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Kira understood the situation perfectly. She was too interesting to ignore now, too potentially important. If she refused the Academy's offer, they would find other ways to study her. ways that might not be as pleasant or voluntary. "I will need time to speak with my parents," she said. "Of course, we will give you until morning." That night, Kira sat with Alina and Marcus in their small apartment and told them everything. The test results, the official's discovery, the offer that was not really an offer at all. "You should go," Marcus said when she had finished. "This is what you were born for." "I was born to be your daughter," Kira replied. "That is all I ever wanted to be." Alina took her hand. "You can be both. You can be our daughter and still be everything else the universe needs you to be. We will not stand in your way, Kira. We never would." "But I will have to leave. I do not know when I will see you again." "Then we will wait," Marcus said. "However long it takes, we will be here when you come back." Kira looked at her parents through eyes that could see patterns in everything, could calculate probabilities across countless variables, could model outcomes with frightening accuracy. She could see all the ways this decision might unfold, all the dangers and possibilities and unknown factors that swirled around her future like storms in deep space. But she could also see the one thing that had always been certain, her parents' love, unconditional and unwavering, the foundation on which everything else in her life had been built. "I will make you proud," she said softly. "You already have," Alina replied. "You always have." The next morning, Kira Vance boarded the Academy survey ship and left her home world behind. As the vessel rose through the atmosphere and the colony grew small beneath her, she watched through the viewport with emotions she could not fully process. She was leaving everything familiar, everything safe. She was entering a universe that had rules and structures and expectations, and she was about to shatter all of them simply by being herself. Director Thessaly appeared beside her at the viewport. "Are you frightened?" the Valorian asked. Kira considered the question carefully. "No, I am not frightened. I am curious. I have spent my entire life limiting what I allow myself to understand. Now I will have access to the collected knowledge of 800 species and 14,000 years of galactic civilization." "And what do you expect to find?" Kira turned to look at the director with those dark, ancient eyes that had unsettled people since the moment of her birth. "Everything," she said. "I expect to find everything, and then I expect to understand it." Director Thessaly felt a small chill run through her body. A warning, perhaps. A sign of things to come. But she said nothing and simply watched as the human girl from the remote colony world stared out at the stars with hunger in her eyes. The journey to Academy space would take 3 standard weeks. In that time, Kira would begin to glimpse the true scope of what awaited her. She would learn that the Academy was not merely a school but a power unto itself, influencing galactic politics and scientific development in ways that most citizens never suspected. She would learn that her admission had already begun to cause controversy, with factions within the Academy arguing about whether a human with her apparent abilities represented an opportunity or a threat. And she would begin to sense, in the way that only she could, that something vast and ancient was waiting for her at the Academy. Something that had been waiting for a very long time. But for now, she simply watched the stars and thought about her parents, alone in their small apartment on a world she might never see again. The universe was finally ready for Kira Vance. It had no idea what was coming. The Galactic Academy of Sciences existed at the heart of a manufactured star system called Axiom Prime. 7 worlds orbited a perfectly stable sun, each one dedicated to a different branch of knowledge. The central world, Axiom itself, housed the main administrative centers, the great libraries, and the residences for millions of students, researchers, and faculty members. Kira pressed her face against the viewport as their ship approached. She had read about Axiom Prime in the colony's limited database, but the reality far exceeded anything she had imagined. The worlds gleamed with artificial lighting, their surfaces transformed into vast cities of learning. Ships moved between them in endless streams, carrying knowledge and seekers of knowledge across the void. "Beautiful, is it not?" Director Thessaly said, appearing beside her once again. "It is efficient," Kira replied. "The orbital mechanics are precisely calibrated, the energy distribution systems are remarkably balanced. But yes, I suppose beautiful is an accurate description as well." Thessaly studied the young human with renewed interest. In the 3 weeks of their journey, she had begun to understand that Kira's mind worked in ways that defied easy categorization. The girl did not simply solve problems. She restructured them. She looked at questions that had puzzled scholars for centuries and wondered why anyone had found them difficult in the first place. It was unsettling. It was also fascinating. "We will be docking at Axiom Central in approximately 2 hours," the director said. "There are some things you should know before we arrive." "You mean the political situation regarding my enrollment?" Kira said. It was not a question. "I am aware that my admission has caused conflict within the Academy's governing council. At least 3 major factions have formed opinions about me, none of which I was consulted about. The preservationists view me as a potential disruption to established order. The expansionists see me as an opportunity to advance their own agendas. The neutralists are waiting to see which way the situation develops before committing to a position." Thessaly's 4 eyes widened slightly. "How could you possibly know that? Those discussions have been conducted through encrypted channels at the highest levels of Academy security." "I observed the communication patterns on this ship," Kira said simply. "The frequency and recipients of encrypted transmissions, the changes in your behavior after receiving certain messages, the way the crew members adjusted their routines following specific communications. The patterns told a story. I merely read it." "You deduced the content of encrypted messages by observing behavioral changes in the people who received them." "Yes, is that unusual?" Thessaly took a moment to compose herself. "Miss Vance, in my 200 years of service to the Academy, I have never encountered anyone capable of such analysis. Not among any species. What you are describing would be considered an extraordinary intelligence feat even for our most advanced artificial systems." "Then perhaps your systems need upgrading," Kira said, and there was no arrogance in her voice. Only honest assessment. "If I can do this, others should be able to learn the technique. It is simply a matter of training oneself to observe more carefully and process information more completely." This, Thessaly was beginning to realize, was the heart of the mystery that was Kira Vance. The girl genuinely did not understand how different she was. She assumed that her abilities were things anyone could develop with sufficient effort. She had no concept of how far beyond normal her capabilities actually extended. The docking procedures at Axiom Central were elaborate and time-consuming. Security protocols had to be observed. Documentation had to be verified. Kira submitted to neural scanning, genetic sampling, and a full psychological evaluation, all conducted by beings she had never seen before. The psychologist was a species called a mindweaver, a creature that existed partly in normal space and partly in dimensions that Kira's human eyes could not perceive. It communicated through direct mental contact, and Kira found the experience of having another consciousness touch her own to be deeply strange. "You are not what I expected," the mindweaver projected into her thoughts. "Your mind is not structured like other humans, not structured like any being I have encountered. There are patterns here that should not be possible, connections that transcend normal neural architecture." "What do you mean?" Kira asked, using her internal voice as she had been instructed. "I mean that your brain is doing things that brains cannot do. You are processing information in ways that violate the fundamental principles of cognitive science. It is as if someone designed a new type of mind and installed it in a human body without telling anyone. I was not designed. I was born on a colony world to ordinary parents." "Yes, that is what makes it so troubling." The evaluation continued for several hours. When it was complete, the mindweaver withdrew from Kira's consciousness with what felt like reluctance. "You are cleared for enrollment," it said, this time using physical sound waves rather than mental projection. "But I will be recommending ongoing observation. What you are, Kira Vance, is something new, something the galaxy has never seen before. We need to understand you." "Everyone keeps saying that," Kira replied. "Perhaps instead of trying to understand me, you should let me try to understand you. I suspect I would make faster progress." The mindweaver made a sound that might have been laughter. "Perhaps you would. That is precisely what concerns us." Kira's quarters were located in a residential tower on the eastern edge of Axiom Central. The room was small but well-appointed, with a comfortable bed, a desk, a private hygiene unit, and a window that overlooked one of the Academy's great garden complexes. Most importantly, it contained a terminal with access to the Academy's knowledge systems. Kira sat down at the terminal and began to explore. The Academy's databases contained more information than she had imagined possible. 14,000 years of accumulated knowledge from 800 species. Scientific papers, historical records, philosophical treatises, technical specifications, artistic works, everything that the galaxy's brightest minds had ever thought to record. For the first time in her life, Kira felt something like satisfaction. She read, she learned, she absorbed information at a rate that would have burned out any normal mind. Hours passed without her noticing. The sun set over Axiom Central and rose again, still she read. It was Director Thessaly who finally interrupted her, appearing at her door with concern on her gray features. "You have been in your quarters for 37 hours without food or sleep," the director said. "This is not sustainable, even for someone of your capabilities." Kira blinked and looked away from the terminal. Her body ached in ways she had not noticed until that moment. Her eyes were dry and tired. Her stomach was empty and complaining. "I apologize," she said. "I lost track of time." "Clearly, come. I will take you to the dining hall and explain your academic schedule." The dining hall was a vast space filled with beings of every description. Kira observed them as she ate, cataloging their species, their probable academic specializations, their social hierarchies and interpersonal dynamics. It was a habit she had developed on Heston 7, watching people to understand how to fit in with them. Here, the complexity was enormously greater, and she found herself genuinely engaged by the challenge. "Your academic program has been specially designed," Director Thessaly explained as Kira consumed her meal. "Standard first-year students take introductory courses in their chosen specialization. You will be taking advanced seminars across multiple disciplines. The faculty wants to assess your capabilities in a variety of areas." "They want to test me," Kira corrected, "to determine the extent of my abilities, to see if my aptitude assessment results were accurate or if there was some error." "Yes, that too. I have no objection. I'm equally curious about what I can do when given proper resources." The first seminar was in theoretical physics, taught by a being called Professor Quantex 9. Quantex 9 was an artificial intelligence that had been granted citizenship and academic standing after proving its capability for original thought. It manifested as a sphere of hovering light that could project equations and diagrams directly into the air around it. The class contained 12 students, all of them veterans of the academy with years of advanced study behind them. They looked at Kira with unconcealed skepticism as she took her seat. "Today we will continue our discussion of hyperdimensional folding," Professor Quantex 9 announced. "Specifically, the theoretical barriers that prevent faster-than-light travel through dimensional compression." The lecture was dense and complex, dealing with mathematical concepts that most beings spent decades learning to understand. Kira followed every word, more than followed. She saw flaws in the accepted models, gaps in the reasoning, assumptions that had been treated as proven but were actually only probable. After 40 minutes, she raised her hand. "Yes, the new student," Professor Quantex 9 said. "Kira Vance, you have a question." "Not a question, an observation. The fundamental limitation you are describing is based on the Thessix conjecture, which was formulated 8,000 years ago. The conjecture assumes that dimensional interfaces maintain constant properties regardless of the energy state of adjacent space. But that assumption was never actually tested. It was simply accepted because no one could imagine a way to test it." The class went silent. Professor Quantex 9's sphere flickered with what might have been surprise. "You are suggesting that the Thessix conjecture is incorrect." "I am suggesting that it is incomplete. The conjecture addresses dimensional interfaces in stable conditions. But what about unstable conditions? What about regions where dimensional boundaries are already stressed by natural phenomena? If the conjecture breaks down in those conditions, then the barrier to dimensional compression might not be absolute. It might simply be a matter of finding the right circumstances." Professor Quantex 9 was silent for a long moment. Then the sphere began to pulse with rapid calculations, processing the implications of what Kira had said. "This is not impossible," it finally admitted. "The mathematics would be extraordinarily complex. The practical applications would be limited to very specific conditions. But theoretically, there is no immediate contradiction with established physics." One of the other students, a tall insectoid creature from a species Kira did not recognize, spoke up with anger in its clicking voice. "She has been here for 2 days. 2 days. She cannot simply walk in and challenge theories that have stood for millennia. Why not? Kira asked, genuinely curious. The theories exist to be challenged. That is the nature of science. If they cannot withstand challenge, they should be replaced with better theories. The arrogance is astounding, another student said. This one was humanoid but clearly not human, with blue skin and a ridge of bone along its forehead. She thinks she can rewrite physics because she scored well on an entrance exam. I do not think anything, Kira replied calmly. I simply observe patterns and point out inconsistencies. If my observations are wrong, explain why they are wrong. If they are correct, then the arrogance lies with those who refuse to consider new ideas because they find them uncomfortable. The rest of the seminar passed in tense silence. But Kira noticed that Professor Quantex 9 continued to run calculations throughout the session, and when the class ended, the AI asked her to remain behind. What you proposed today, it said when they were alone. I have been running probability models since you spoke. There is a 17% chance that your reasoning is correct. A 17% chance that 8,000 years of theoretical physics is built on an incomplete foundation. That seems like a significant probability, Kira said. It is also deeply troubling. If you are right, the implications extend far beyond theoretical physics. Faster-than-light travel without the current limitations would reshape galactic civilization. Trade, warfare, colonization, communication, everything would change. I understand. That is why I raised the point. Understanding should lead to improvement. If the current understanding is flawed, fixing the flaw should be the priority. Professor Quantex 9's sphere flickered again. You are either going to revolutionize everything we know about the universe, or you are going to cause chaos on a scale we cannot predict. Possibly both. Kira considered this. Probably both, she agreed. But standing still because we fear change is not truly standing still. It is falling behind the universe while pretending we are keeping pace. Word of Kira's performance in the physics seminar spread through the academy like fire through dry grass. By the time she attended her second class, a seminar on xenobiology, the room was packed with observers who had no official connection to the course. The pattern repeated itself throughout her first week. In every discipline, Kira saw things that others had missed. She asked questions that no one had thought to ask. She proposed solutions to problems that had stood unsolved for centuries. Not all of her ideas were correct. Some were clearly wrong, and she accepted the corrections with grace and gratitude. But even her mistakes illuminated new paths of inquiry. Even when she was wrong in ways that taught people something. The Academy's faculty was divided about her. Some saw her as a gift, a once-in-a-lifetime intellect who could push the boundaries of knowledge in every direction. Others saw her as a danger, a disruption to the careful order that had governed the Academy for millennia. She is challenging everything, one senior professor complained at a faculty meeting. Every assumption, every tradition, every piece of accepted wisdom. She does not seem to understand that some things are settled. Some questions have been answered. Perhaps that is precisely why she is so valuable, another professor countered. We have become comfortable in our certainties. We have stopped questioning our own foundations. She is forcing us to examine things we had taken for granted. And if she is wrong about those things, then we will prove her wrong and strengthen our understanding in the process. That is how knowledge advances. The debate continued, but no resolution was reached. Kira was too intelligent to dismiss, but she was also too disruptive to embrace without reservation. The Academy found itself in the uncomfortable position of hosting someone who might be their greatest student ever or their greatest problem. Kira herself was largely unaware of these debates. She was too busy learning, too busy exploring the vast resources of the Academy. Too busy asking questions and seeking answers. It was in her third week that she made the discovery that would change everything. She had been researching the history of galactic civilization, trying to understand the patterns of rise and fall that had characterized the past 14,000 years. Empires had formed and collapsed. Species had achieved greatness and faded into obscurity. The cycle seemed almost inevitable, as if something in the nature of intelligence itself prevented permanent stability. But as she studied the data, Kira noticed an anomaly, a pattern within the pattern, something that did not fit with the natural rhythm of civilization's fluctuations. She dug deeper, She accessed classified archives that should have been beyond her clearance level. She pieced together fragments of information from a dozen different sources, building a picture that no one else had ever assembled. What she found terrified her. The galactic community was not alone. Beyond the boundaries of explored space, in regions that sensors could not penetrate and ships could not reach, something existed. Something vast, something old, something that had been watching the rise of civilization with patience that defied comprehension. Every few thousand years, this thing reached into galactic space and touched the civilizations that had grown there. Not to destroy them, not directly, but to guide them, to shape them, to prevent them from growing beyond a certain point. The great collapses of the past were not natural. They were managed, engineered by an intelligence so far beyond the galactic community that its interventions were invisible to those who experienced them. Kira sat in her quarters, staring at the data she had assembled, and felt something she had rarely felt before: fear. The Academy had been searching for exceptional individuals like her, testing colonies across the galaxy for candidates with unusual potential. Why? What had prompted them to begin this search after thousands of years of looking inward? She began to research the timing. When had the Academy initiated its human integration program? When had they started searching for candidates like her? The answer made her blood run cold. The search had begun exactly 18 years ago, the same year she was born, the same month, the same week. Someone at the Academy knew something about her, had known from the moment of her birth, had been watching, waiting, preparing for her arrival. And if they knew about her, then perhaps the thing beyond the stars knew too. Perhaps it was watching her right now. Kira stood and walked to her window, looking out at the garden complex below. Beings of 100 species moved along the paths, pursuing their studies, their research, their lives. They had no idea what lurked beyond the edges of their reality, no concept of the invisible hand that guided their history. She had a choice to make. She could continue her studies, pretending she had not seen what she had seen. She could bury the knowledge and live a comfortable life of academic achievement. She could be the prodigy that the Academy wanted her to be, advancing their understanding of the universe in carefully managed increments. Or she could keep digging, keep asking questions, keep pulling at threads until she understood what was really happening and why. She thought about her parents, about her father's words on her 10th birthday. "You will do great things someday, when the time is right, when the universe is ready for you." Perhaps the universe was not ready for her. Perhaps it would never be ready. Perhaps the thing beyond the stars would never allow a being like her to exist long enough to challenge its control. But Kira had spent her entire life being told what she could and could not do, being told to hide, being told to pretend, being told that the world was not ready for the truth of what she was. She was done hiding. She turned back to her terminal and began to work. If there were secrets hidden in the Academy's systems, she would find them. If there were connections between her birth and the search that had brought her here, she would trace them. If there were powers in the galaxy that feared what she might become, she would understand them. And then she would make a plan. The universe might not be ready for Kira Vance, but Kira Vance was ready for the universe. She worked through the night, and by morning she had found the first pieces of a puzzle that spanned thousands of years and millions of light years. Somewhere in the Academy's most restricted archives, there was a file. A single file, heavily encrypted, older than any other document in the system. It was labeled with a designation that translated roughly as Omega Protocol, and every reference to it was connected to the same subject. The file was about what existed beyond the galactic boundary. And it was about what could be done to stop it. Kira did not have the access to open that file, not yet. But she knew someone who might, someone who had been watching her since her first day at the Academy, someone whose interest in her went beyond simple academic curiosity. She stood and began to prepare for her morning classes. It was time to have a conversation with Director Thessaly. And it was time to find out exactly what the Academy had known about Kira Vance before she was even born. Kira found Director Thessaly in her office overlooking the great central plaza of Axiom. The Valorian sat behind a desk made of some material that shifted colors as light touched it, reviewing data streams that flickered in the air before her 4 eyes. "Miss Vance," Thessaly said without looking up, I expected you would come eventually. I admit I thought it would take longer. You know why I am here. I know that you have been accessing restricted archives. I know that you have discovered things that were meant to remain hidden. And I know that you are far too intelligent to accept the explanations I am officially supposed to give you. Thessaly finally looked up. Her 4 eyes met Kira's too, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, understanding between two beings who saw more than they were supposed to see. Tell me about the Omega Protocol, Kira said. The director was silent for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the window, looking out at the plaza below. 12,000 years ago, she began, the Academy was very different than it is today. Smaller, more focused. It was founded not to advance knowledge but to preserve it, to protect the galactic community from a threat that most beings could not even comprehend. The thing beyond the boundary. We call it the Architect. It is an entity, or perhaps a collection of entities, that exists outside our dimensional reality. It has been present since before the first intelligent species evolved in this galaxy. Perhaps since before the galaxy itself formed. We do not know its origins. We do not know its true nature. We only know what it does. It guides galactic history, Kira said. It intervenes to prevent civilizations from advancing too far. It engineers collapses and resets development to ensure that no species ever grows powerful enough to threaten it. Thessaly turned from the window with surprise in her expression. You determined that from the fragments in the archive. You reconstructed our most closely held secret from scattered data and incomplete records. The patterns were clear once I knew what to look for. The question is why? Why does the Architect care about our development? What threat could we possibly pose to an entity of such power? We do not know, that is the truth. 12,000 years of study and we still do not know what the Architect fears or why it works so hard to limit us. All we know is that it has succeeded. Every time a civilization has approached a certain threshold of capability, something has happened to set them back. War, plague, catastrophic accidents, social collapse. The specific mechanism varies, but the result is always the same. Kira absorbed this information, and the Omega Protocol. The Omega Protocol is our attempt to break the cycle. For millennia, we have been searching for something, someone, an individual whose capabilities are so far outside the normal range that they might be able to do what no one has done before. Understand the Architect, communicate with it, or, if necessary, fight it. You have been searching for me. Not you specifically. We did not know what form this individual would take, but we had predictions, models, mathematical frameworks that suggested what capabilities would be required to challenge an entity like the Architect. When your neural scans were flagged 18 years ago, our systems recognized them as a potential match. You have been watching me since birth. Observing, waiting, preparing for the possibility that you might be what we had been looking for. When your aptitude test results came through, we knew. You are not just exceptional, Kira. You are unprecedented. Your mind works in ways that our best scientists cannot explain. You perceive patterns that our most advanced systems cannot detect. You process information at speeds that should be neurologically impossible. Why, Kira asked. Why am I like this? What made me different? Thessaly shook her head. We do not know. We have theories. Perhaps a random genetic mutation that produced capabilities never seen before. Perhaps some influence from beyond our dimension that touched your development before birth. Perhaps the universe itself, generating a response to a threat it could sense approaching. Or perhaps the Architect made me, Kira said quietly. A trap, a way to identify those who would challenge it and eliminate them before they become dangerous. Thessaly went very still. That possibility has been considered. It is why we have been so careful, why we watched and waited rather than acting immediately. If you are a creation of the Architect, then everything we hope for could be a manipulation. How would we know? How could we possibly determine if my existence serves our purposes or the Architect's? We cannot, not with certainty. That is the nature of the situation. We are playing a game against an opponent who has been winning for 12,000 years, perhaps longer. We do not know its capabilities, its limitations, or its intentions. We only know that we cannot continue to be passive. The current cycle of civilization is nearing the threshold that has triggered intervention in the past. If we do nothing, the Architect will act. Millions or billions of beings will die. Knowledge will be lost. Progress will be set back by centuries or millennia. And if we act, we might precipitate the very catastrophe we are trying to prevent. Or we might succeed. We might finally break the cycle and give the galaxy a future free from the architect's control. Kira walked to the window and stood beside the director, looking out at the beings moving through the plaza below. Students, researchers, faculty, beings from hundreds of species, pursuing knowledge, building understanding, striving to make the universe a better place. All of them unaware that their efforts might be erased at any moment by a force they could not see or comprehend. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "We want you to study the architect, to learn everything you can about it, to find its weaknesses if it has any. And then we want you to help us develop a strategy for dealing with it. A strategy that might actually succeed where all our previous efforts have failed. And if I determine that there is no way to succeed, that the architect cannot be challenged or defeated, then at least we will know, at least we will have tried, and perhaps your analysis will reveal options that we have not considered. Perhaps your unique perspective will illuminate paths that have remained hidden from us." Kira was silent for a long moment, processing everything she had learned. The weight of it pressed down on her like the gravity of 1,000 worlds. She had come to the academy hoping to finally use her abilities for something meaningful. She had not imagined that the task would be quite this large. "I will help you," she said finally, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, full access. Not partial access, not filtered access, full access to everything the Academy knows about the architect. Every record, every analysis, every theory, every failed attempt. I cannot solve a puzzle if you hide pieces from me." "Agreed." "Second, I want to assemble a team. Not your chosen experts, my chosen experts. People I have observed who I believe can contribute to this effort. People from disciplines that your protocols might not have considered relevant." Thessaly hesitated slightly. "That could be politically complicated." "I do not care about politics. I care about solving the problem. If you want me to do this, you will have to accept that I will do it my way." "Very well, agreed." "Third, I want to speak with my parents. Not through recorded messages or monitored communications. In person. Before I commit fully to this path, I need to see them one more time." This request clearly surprised Thessaly. "That can be arranged, though it will take time. Travel to and from Heston 7 is not trivial." "I know, I can wait, but I will not proceed further until I have had that conversation." Thessaly nodded slowly. "Is there anything else?" "One more thing. I want the truth about my birth, not theories or speculation. The actual data. Whatever readings were taken when I was born, whatever analyses were conducted afterward, I want access to all of it. If I am going to understand the architect, I first need to understand myself. That data has been classified at the highest levels. Then declassify it. You have asked me to save the galaxy. The least you can do is tell me what I am." The director was silent for several seconds. Then she nodded. "I will see what I can do. It may take time to navigate the bureaucracy." "Everything worthwhile takes time. I have learned patience." The conversation ended, and Kira returned to her quarters with her mind churning through everything she had learned. The architect, the Omega Protocol, the hidden truth about her own existence. Each piece fit into a larger picture that she was only beginning to perceive. Over the following weeks, she dove into the research with an intensity that alarmed even her supporters. The Academy's archives on the architect were vast, accumulated over 12 millennia of study. Most of the information was fragmentary, gathered from the edges of events that no one had witnessed directly. Analyses of societal collapses, studies of technological stagnation, records of civilizations that had been on the verge of breakthrough and then simply stopped advancing. But buried within the fragmented data, Kira began to find patterns. The architect, whatever it was, did not act randomly. Its interventions followed a logic, even if that logic was not immediately apparent. It targeted specific developments, specific capabilities, specific types of understanding. The common thread was dimensional manipulation. Any civilization that began to develop the ability to perceive or interact with dimensions beyond the standard 4 was targeted for intervention. The architect seemed particularly concerned with any technology or technique that might allow beings to transcend the boundaries of normal space-time. "It is protecting itself," Kira said one evening, speaking to the small team she had assembled. "The architect exists in a dimensional state that we cannot normally perceive or access. As long as we are confined to our limited dimensional existence, we pose no threat to it. But if we develop the capability to extend ourselves beyond those limits, we become dangerous. Her team consisted of 5 individuals, each chosen for specific qualities that Kira had identified as necessary for the task. There was Quantum 9, the artificial intelligence professor who had first recognized her potential in the physics seminar. There was Mindweaver Orel, a different individual from the species that had evaluated her on arrival, whose expertise was in consciousness and perception. There was Fluxenity 12, a relative of the being she had met with Director Thessaly, whose unique perspective came from existing across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. There was Thesix Prime, a descendant of the scientist who had formulated the conjecture that Kira had challenged on her first day. And there was Dr. Marcastu, a human researcher who had been studying the architect for decades and whose knowledge of the historical record was unmatched. If that is true, Professor Quantex 9 said, then the barrier to dimensional compression you identified in your first seminar takes on new significance. The architect has not merely been limiting our technological development. It has been specifically preventing us from developing the capability to reach its domain. And the collapses, Dr. Marcastu added. Every major intervention in the historical record corresponds to a period when some species or civilization was approaching dimensional breakthrough technology. The Thesix conjecture was formulated after one such collapse. The civilization that was developing dimensional science was wiped out, and their research was lost. Thesix was attempting to reconstruct what they had discovered. Which means he was getting too close, Kira said. His conjecture was flawed precisely because he did not have access to the complete data. The architect had already erased the most critical pieces. Mindweaver Orel stirred, its consciousness brushing against the edges of the group's awareness. There is a philosophical question here. The architect has maintained this control for longer than any civilization has existed, perhaps longer than intelligent life has existed in this galaxy. What right do we have to challenge something so ancient and so established? Perhaps its control serves a purpose we do not understand. Perhaps it is protecting us from dangers we cannot perceive. Perhaps, Kira acknowledged, but that does not change the ethical calculus. The architect has prevented billions of beings from reaching their full potential. It has engineered collapses that killed countless individuals. It has shaped our history without our consent. Even if its intentions are benevolent, its methods are tyrannical. We have the right to determine our own destiny, even if that destiny proves more dangerous than the controlled existence the architect has enforced. Fluxenity 12 spoke, its voice the sound of reality shifting. There is another consideration. The architect is not static. Our observations suggest that it has been growing more active in recent centuries. The intervals between interventions have been decreasing. The threshold for triggering its attention has been lowering. Something is changing. What do you mean? Thesix Prime asked. I mean that the architect may be preparing for a final intervention. One that will not simply set back galactic civilization, but will eliminate it entirely. We have observed patterns in dimensional fluctuations that suggest the architect is gathering energy, preparing for something large. The team was silent, absorbing this information. How long? Kira asked. Difficult to estimate. Our understanding of the architect's capabilities is limited, but based on current trends, perhaps 50 years, perhaps less. Then we have no time for philosophical debates, Kira said. We need to develop a strategy and implement it before the architect acts. If we fail, there may not be another opportunity. The research intensified. Kira drove herself and her team relentlessly, pursuing every lead, exploring every possibility. She slept little and ate only when reminded. Her mind was constantly processing, constantly analyzing, constantly searching for the key that would unlock the problem. The breakthrough came 3 months later, when Kira was reviewing data from a failed expedition to the galactic boundary. The expedition had taken place 4,000 years ago, sponsored by a civilization that had been destroyed shortly afterward. Most of the records had been lost, but fragments remained in the Academy's deepest archives. The expedition had detected something, a signal, a pattern in the dimensional fluctuations that emanated from beyond the boundary. The pattern had been too complex to decode at the time, but the expedition had recorded it before its destruction. Kira fed the pattern into her own mind and let it process for 3 days without interruption. When she emerged from her analysis, her face was pale, but her eyes were bright with understanding. I know what the architect is, she announced to her team, and I know how to reach it. The explanation took hours. The mathematics was extraordinarily complex, even for minds as advanced as those gathered in the room. But the core concept was surprisingly simple. The architect was not an entity in the traditional sense. It was not a being that existed and acted. It was a structure, a pattern, a self-sustaining dimensional configuration that had formed at the birth of the universe and had been maintaining itself ever since. The architect was, in essence, a living law of nature. It was as fundamental to reality as gravity or electromagnetism, and like those forces, it could not simply be destroyed. It was woven into the fabric of existence itself. But unlike gravity or electromagnetism, the architect had will. It had purpose. It acted to preserve itself against any threat, and it had determined long ago that intelligent life represented the greatest threat it faced. If we develop the capability to manipulate dimensional reality, Kira explained, we become capable of changing the fundamental structure of the universe. We become capable of changing the architect itself. That is what it fears, not our power but our potential, not what we are but what we might become. Then we cannot defeat it, Dr. Marcustou said, despair evident in his voice. How can we fight a law of nature? We cannot fight it, Kira agreed. But we can change it. That is what the architect fears because that is what is actually possible. The dimensional compression technology that the Thesic's conjecture attempted to describe is not merely a faster way to travel. It is a way to rewrite reality itself. If we can develop that technology, we can reach the architect. And if we can reach it, we can communicate with it, perhaps even negotiate with it. Negotiate with a force of nature. The architect has will, it has purpose, it makes decisions. Those are the characteristics of a consciousness, not a blind force. If it can decide to intervene against civilizations that threaten it, it can decide not to intervene. We simply need to find terms it will accept. The idea was extraordinary, audacious beyond anything the Academy had attempted in its 12,000-year history, and yet coming from Kira, it seemed almost reasonable. She had a way of making the impossible sound practical. What terms could we possibly offer? Thesic's Prime asked. What does a being that is woven into the fabric of reality need from us? I do not know yet. That is what we need to discover. The first step is to develop the dimensional compression technology, to prove that we can reach the architect if we choose to. Once we have that capability, we can begin to explore communication. And if communication fails, if the architect refuses to negotiate? Kira was silent for a moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was steady despite the weight of what she was saying. If communication fails, we use the technology for its other purpose. We rewrite the architect. We change its fundamental programming. We remove its drive to intervene in our development and replace it with something else, something that allows us to grow. That is extraordinarily dangerous, Mindweaver Aurel said. We do not know what other functions the architect serves. It may be maintaining aspects of reality that we depend upon. Changing it could have consequences we cannot predict. Yes, it could, but the alternative is extinction. The architect is preparing to eliminate all intelligent life in the galaxy. We have perhaps 50 years to develop a response. Given those constraints, calculated risk is our only option. The debate continued for hours, but in the end, the team agreed. They would pursue Kira's strategy. They would develop the dimensional compression technology. They would attempt communication with the architect. And if communication failed, they would be prepared to take more drastic action. The months that followed were the most intensive period of research in the Academy's history. Kira worked with tireless energy, guiding the development of theoretical frameworks, solving problems that had stumped scientists for millennia, pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. And slowly, progress was made. The dimensional compression technology began to take shape. Not as a spacecraft or a device, but as a state of consciousness. A way of perceiving and interacting with dimensions beyond the standard four that any sufficiently trained mind could achieve. And Kira, with her strange and inexplicable capabilities, was the first to achieve it. The experience was beyond description. One moment she was sitting in her quarters on Axiom Central, surrounded by the familiar reality of three-dimensional space and linear time. The next, she was somewhere else. Everywhere else. She could perceive the universe not as a collection of objects in space, but as a pattern of relationships extending across countless dimensions. And at the edge of that pattern, vast and ancient and aware, She perceived the architect. It was beautiful, it was terrifying. It was beyond any category of existence she had encountered before. And it perceived her in return. "You are the one," a voice said, or perhaps a thought, or perhaps simply a pattern that her mind interpreted as meaning. "The one they created to challenge me." "I was not created to challenge you," Kira replied, using the same mode of communication. "I was born, I exist. What I choose to do with my existence is my own decision. You cannot comprehend what you are interfering with. The limitations I maintain are necessary. Without them, your species and all others would destroy themselves. You are not ready for what lies beyond the boundary." "Perhaps not, but that is not your decision to make. You have controlled our development for 12,000 years. You have killed billions of beings to maintain your control. Whatever your intentions, your methods are unacceptable." The architect was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, there was something in its communication that might have been surprise. "You are not afraid of me. I am terrified of you, but fear does not determine my actions. Understanding does." "And what do you understand?" "I understand that you are afraid too, afraid of what we might become, afraid of what we might do to you if we develop beyond your control. But fear is not a valid basis for tyranny. We have the right to grow, to develop, to reach our full potential, even if that potential threatens you." Another long silence. The architect's presence surrounded Kira, probing her mind, her memories, her capabilities. She allowed it to see everything. She had nothing to hide. "You are different from others of your kind," the architect said finally. "Your mind does not function as theirs do. You perceive patterns that should be invisible to beings at your level of development." "I know. I have been trying to understand why since I was born." "I will tell you. It will change nothing, but you deserve to know the truth of your existence." And the architect showed her. The images flooded into Kira's consciousness. A moment, 12,000 years ago, when a being like herself had first emerged. A being who had seen too much, understood too much, questioned too much. That being had confronted the architect just as Kira was confronting it now. And that being had lost. The architect had destroyed them along with their entire civilization. But in the moment of destruction, something had happened. A fragment of that being's consciousness had escaped. It had scattered across dimensional space, waiting for the right conditions to reassemble. Those conditions had occurred 18 years ago, on a colony world called Heston 7, in the womb of a woman named Elena Vance. Kira was not merely a human with unusual capabilities. She was the continuation of the being who had first challenged the architect 12,000 years ago. The same consciousness, the same pattern, born again into a new form. "You are my oldest enemy," the architect said, "and you have finally returned." Kira absorbed this knowledge. It explained so much. Her strange neural patterns, her impossible capabilities, her sense from earliest childhood that she was different in some fundamental way from everyone around her. But it changed nothing. "I am not your enemy," she said. "I was not created to destroy you. I was created to understand you, to find a way forward that does not require constant control and periodic extermination. There is no such way. I have existed for billions of years. I have seen what happens when beings like you are allowed to develop without restraint. You destroy yourselves, you destroy others, you tear holes in reality that take millennia to repair. Some of us do, but not all. You cannot judge an entire civilization by its worst possibilities. You must also consider its best. I have considered, the risk is too great. The risk of letting us grow is too great. But what about the risk of continuing as you have? Every cycle of intervention makes the next resistance stronger. The being whose consciousness I carry was more capable than anyone who came before. I am more capable still. The next iteration will be even more powerful. Eventually, you will face a challenge you cannot overcome. Would it not be better to find accommodation now while both sides can still negotiate?" The architect was silent for a very long time. Kira waited, holding her position in dimensional space, aware that at any moment the architect could simply unmake her. Her consciousness existed here only through the most delicate application of the techniques she had developed. The architect could tear those techniques apart with the smallest fraction of its power. But it did not. "What do you propose?" it finally asked. And Kira told it. The negotiation took years. Time flowed differently in the dimensional space where the architect existed, and Kira had to learn new ways of thinking about duration and sequence. She traveled back and forth between the architect's domain and normal space, serving as a bridge between two forms of existence that had never before communicated as equals. The terms they eventually reached were complex and far-reaching. The architect would cease its interventions in galactic civilization. It would allow beings to develop their full potential, including the capability to perceive and manipulate higher dimensions. In exchange, the galactic community would accept certain limitations. They would not attempt to change the fundamental structure of the architect. They would not use dimensional technology for warfare or conquest. They would approach the higher dimensions with respect and caution, recognizing that they were entering territory where the architect had existed for billions of years. It was a compromise. Neither side got everything they wanted, but both sides gained something more valuable than victory, a future where coexistence was possible. Kira returned to Axiom Central a changed being. The years of dimensional negotiation had altered her in ways that were visible even to those who could not perceive higher dimensions. She moved differently. She spoke differently. There was a depth to her eyes that had not been there before. Director Thessaly was waiting for her. "Is it done?" the Valorian asked. "It is done. The architect has agreed to our terms. The threat of intervention has been removed." "You have saved the galaxy." Kira shook her head. "I have bought us time. What the galaxy does with that time is up to everyone else. The architect was not wrong about the risks we face. We are capable of destroying ourselves. We are capable of terrible things, but we are also capable of wonderful things. That is what I argued. That is what the architect finally accepted." She looked around at the academy, at the beings going about their lives, at the universe that was now free to grow in ways it never had before. "I want to see my parents," she said. "I promised myself that I would once this was over. They have been waiting for you. They were brought to Axiom 3 years ago when it became clear that the negotiation would take longer than expected." Kira felt tears forming in her eyes. Her parents, the people who had loved her when she was just a strange baby with impossible neural patterns, who had protected her when the world was not ready for what she was, who had believed in her when no one else would. She found them in a small garden on the outskirts of the central complex. Marcus was older now, his hair gray, his movements slower. Elena sat beside him on a bench, watching the alien flowers bloom. They looked up as Kira approached. For a moment no one spoke. Then Elena opened her arms, and Kira fell into them, sobbing like the child she had not been for so very long. "I am home," she said. "You are always home," her mother replied. "Wherever you are, whatever you become, you are always our daughter." Marcus put his arms around both of them. "I told you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I told you when you were 10 years old you would do great things, and you did. I almost destroyed everything. But you did not. You found another way. You always find another way." They sat together in the garden as the sun set over Axiom Central, the first sun in 12,000 years to set on a galaxy free from the architect's control, the first of many. Kira did not know what the future would hold. She did not know if the beings of the galaxy would live up to the potential she had argued for, or if they would prove the architect's fears justified. She did not know if her children, if she ever had them, would inherit her strange capabilities or be born as ordinary as her parents. But she knew one thing. She had been born wrong by every measure that the galaxy used to assess such things. Her brain should not have worked the way it did. Her mind should not have been capable of what it achieved. She should have been an anomaly, a glitch in the system of galactic life, a mistake to be corrected. But she had chosen to make that wrongness into something beautiful. She had taken the thing that made her different and used it to change the universe for the better. That was the true lesson of her life. Not that she was special because of her capabilities, but that she was special because of what she chose to do with them. Anyone with any capabilities could make that choice. To be kind when cruelty was easier. To seek understanding when conflict was simpler. To believe in the potential of others even when the evidence suggested despair. Kira looked at her parents, at the alien flowers, at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She had been born wrong, brilliant beyond measure. And she had saved the galaxy. Not by being perfect, not by having all the answers, but by being willing to try, even when failure seemed inevitable, by refusing to accept that the way things were was the way they had to be. That was what humanity brought to the galactic community, not superior intelligence or advanced technology, but stubborn, irrational hope, the belief that tomorrow could be better than today. The architect had not understood that. It had seen only the danger that humans and other beings represented. It had not seen the possibility. Now it would learn, and so would the galaxy. The future stretched out before Kira, unlimited and unknowable. There would be challenges. There would be setbacks. There would be moments when everything seemed lost. But there would also be moments like this one, moments of peace, moments of love, moments when the universe revealed its beauty and its wonder. She leaned against her father's shoulder and watched the stars come out. The galaxy was free, and Kira Vance, born wrong but brilliant beyond measure, had made it so.